What's wrong with DC Comics and why has the brand fallen into such decline? Well, the answer to that question is very simple. No one at DC Comics really understands how publishing works, and moreover, no one really understands how publishing works in a post 2008 publishing world. The current publisher at DC Comics, Dan Dido, who was given that position back in 2002, has no idea on how publishing works. This man has absolutely no experience at a publishing house. He does not understand how catalogs are managed. He doesn't understand how catalogs of characters are managed. He doesn't understand how franchises are managed. And in publishing, you have to have an understanding of how these mechanics work if you hope to manage a series or a group of series to successful sales. And his co publisher, Jim Lee, really has no understanding of the post 2008 publishing world. You see, Jim Lee comes from the 1990s comic book world, which was primarily a speculator market. And during that market, you had a lot of people who were buying books primarily for creative teams and because a big name creator was on it. And they would go out, and hoard by buying 10 or 15 copies of a number one issue in the hopes of anticipating a big return on an investment. Unfortunately, around 1993-94, the whole comic book industry collapsed with the death of Superman, and his approach to publishing comics has proven to be outdated and outmoded. We no longer have a speculator market. The market has been in a slump for over 22 years, and the marketing and businesses approaches that were used back in the 1990s to, generate controversy and shock among readers, that doesn't work anymore because the audience has pretty much moved on. Unfortunately, DC Comics continues to use archaic approaches and is basically, because the head publisher has no vision for it, is a rudderless and directionless ship. Um, and I say it's a rudderless and directionless ship because I look at the publications that are being produced and there's no theme to them. There is no family to them outside of the Batman family titles, and even that's, really dysfunctional. There's no direction or tone set for the overall catalog of characters. There's no long term plan for the overall DC Comics catalog. If you look at the DC Comics brand over the last 12, 13 years, they've gone under more changes than some major company products like I talked about in the previous video that have been around for 40 or 50 years. I mean, Jet Dry didn't become Finish until about 40 years into it when Finish and Jet Dry merged. But DC Comics has gone under at least about 6 reboots in the past 7 or 8 years, and that's just too many. And that's caused long-term damage to the brand because customers today just can't access the product. They can't reach the product. Just when readers are getting to know a product at DC, they always cancel it, and that's a bad trend in comics today because it takes a long time for a book to find an audience, and the minute readers start getting into it, well, what do they get? An announcement of a cancellation. And that really sours readers, it really frustrates them because they were just starting to read this book, starting to get into it, and then all of a sudden they get a cancellation notice. That's one of the big problems at DC. They're still, again, focusing on that 1990s, model, looking for that instant success, million copy sales, million readers, big buzz. That's not going to happen in the 21st century, especially in this post 2008 publishing world. Right now, again, the market has been in a slump for 22, 23 years. So you're not going to get those type of numbers overnight. I think a lot of people at DC and even at Marvel are still hoping and praying for the return of a day of a giant-sized X-Men #1 or, a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man #1 where these books got these monster numbers, but you're never going to have, one book, bring the industry back. And even back then, that never, really materialized because in serialized publishing, it works like this. People, they'll start with either a back issue or they'll start with the most recent issue and they may start going back, or they may start with a later issue and start going forward. And the big problem that impedes that type of, readers getting into those type of books that way is, one, all of these reboots and relaunches, and two, just people, not being able to connect with the characters. I mean, the minute they start to connect with a character, all of a sudden the entire universe is upheaved, everything is rebooted and restarted, and that's not how it goes. A lot of these guys are still, again, thinking that publishing is some sort of sprint where you're going to get to instant success, and that's never been how the business has ever worked. Publishing is a marathon, and you have to have patience and endurance in order to run the race. Because in order to get to success in publishing, you're going to have to, be able to weather out those storms, go through those, hard times, and to reach that, peak point. You have to go through a lot of rough stuff before you eventually reach the peak point. And a lot of people, they don't understand this at DC. They don't understand that, it's a long haul business. It's like driving all the way from New York to California. You're gonna be, if you've ever driven like that, you know that there's a lot of rest stops. You're gonna have to take a lot of breaks, and it's not going to be done in a day. It's not going to be done in 2 days. It may take 3 to 5 days for you to get from New York to California. And for a publisher like DC to rebuild its brand, this is a plan that's going to take at least maybe, I'd say, anywhere from 5 to about 15 years. And because the damage is quite extensive. I mean, if we look at the decade and a half that Dan Dido has been in charge of DC, he has done, extensive damage to the brand of characters, extensive damage to the catalog, and extensive damage, to the reputation of the brand among customers. And that takes years to rebuild. I mean, it's not something that's going to be done overnight. You really need a visionary with a long-term plan towards rebuilding the brand in the hopes of getting those readers to come back to DC Comics. And you need, a visionary who will set a tone and direction for the characters, the catalog, and the stories that are produced that's going to get those readers back. And someone who understands that, the marketplace has again changed since 2008. And the marketplace really is more family oriented, more kid oriented. A lot of people who are at the median age for reading comics today are 35 and up, and they have small children, and they want to share superheroes with their children. They want stories that they can share with their kids, and they don't see that at the modern day DC Comics. What they're seeing is a lot of, again, 1980s, late 1980s, 1990s dark and gritty stuff, and dark and gritty stuff is rendered obsolete. If we look at, the numbers for competitors like Marvel Studios Avengers movies and the Avengers itself, it's proving to everyone that no one wants dark and gritty, especially when they have small children they want to take to these movies, and they want to share these characters. So DC's was right at the right point before Dido came in, with a family-friendly product. You really need a family-friendly product right about now. Characters that everybody can share with each other, stories that everybody, feels comfortable reading and being a part of. That's what DC Comics really needs to be focused on, but unfortunately, everyone is still trying to be the next Frank Miller or the next Alan Moore, and we don't need that type of writer anymore. What we need at a DC Comics brand, is a family brand, because families want to share these characters. I've read on numerous, message boards and watched numerous videos. People say they want family-friendly comics, they want kid-friendly comics, but kid-friendly does not mean dumbed down like something like the products that some of these people produce, like your DC Comics for girls. What they want is a DC Comics that's successful. I mean, Young Justice did a good job of making a family-friendly DC, and that's what people, want. But the problems at DC come from, people not understanding how publishing works, not understanding the mechanics of it, and not understanding what type of stories, make for good writing. People again, want stories that are in a PG 13 range, family friendly stories. They want characters that anybody can relate to and identify with. And they really do not want, these mega crossovers that, encompass the entire catalog. Again, when you have a catalog and it's managed properly, you're able to build brands for each character. Like for your Superman family books, they can be Superman right by themselves. Your Batman family books can be distinct. Your Flash family books can be distinct, and your Wonder Woman family books can be distinct. But there's no real distinction with the DC brand these days. I mean, everything is either some big crossover event or the books, wind up getting lost because there's no real direction to them because editorial has not set a tone or a direction for the overall catalog. And when you set a tone or a direction for the catalog, then everybody knows where to go and how to set their runs and how to tell their own stories. And each character can tell their own stories in the overall universe. And the biggest problem I see with everybody with this trying to quick fix things with all these reboots is they don't understand that you know comic book universes are built, and they're built over a long period of time. It took at least about 60 years for the DC universe to get to the point where it is today, and it's not going to be done in a year. That was one of the big problems with the New 52, was that they tried to build an entire universe overnight, and that's just not going to happen. It's just too overwhelming. It's just too many titles, and it's just too much, you know, for one reader to digest in one sitting. If you're going to build a universe, it has to be built over time. I know this to be true because I had to build the SJS Direct universe, and that started, back in 2002 with the first book, Isis, and because of financial issues, I couldn't, get back to publishing until about 2011 when I did Temptation of John Haynes. And in order for me to reference, the ISIS characters, I did put the East Team character in the Temptation of John Haynes. But to really cement the universe, I did that with one sentence in one of the final chapters in the book. And from there, I was able to go on to use that as a foundation to build into 2012's ISIS series and books like ISIS Wrath of the Cyber Goddess. And that's how you build a universe. It takes time. It's not done, over a single story or a single event. I mean, universes have to be built, and that again requires patience and endurance because you're going to run into, rough spots. You're going to run into stories that don't sell, stories that don't get over with readers, and you have to have that discipline in order to be able to put a period at the end of what doesn't work and move on and work with what did work. And I don't see that type of, understanding of how publishing works from anybody at DC Comics. They really don't understand that, this, again, in a marathon, that's what marathon runners do. If something's not working or they're not, their bodies aren't healthy, they have to stop and then reassess and then, keep running and find a way to keep running. So that's how they do things. And they train themselves so they can understand, how their bodies work so that they can run that entire marathon. But when you don't have a publishing professional in place at a publishing house, they don't know when they're making mistakes or how they're making mistakes or what they're doing wrong, and there's nobody there really to help them correct. What I believe DC Comics really needs is a publishing professional to come in there and really, manage this brand, and have the patience and understanding to work towards rebuilding it. Because anybody who would work in publishing like I do would understand that this brand has suffered a lot of damage and is in dire need of a complete rebuild.